The sky was soft and pale blue that morning. The sun was not too bright and a gentle breeze moved through the city streets. It felt like a peaceful start to the day. A black woman named Angela stepped out of her small apartment with her neat black suit on. She worked hard to get where she was. Every morning she carried her ID and badge close to her heart. She was proud to serve her country as a federal agent. It was a job that came with responsibility, training, and quiet strength. She liked starting her day early so she could arrive at work before the rush began. Angela locked her door, walked down the steps, and headed to her car parked near the curb. The neighborhood was quiet. The sound of birds and a few cars in the distance gave the morning a calm rhythm. She got into her black sedan, adjusted her seatbelt, and took a deep breath. She had an important meeting that day. It was a security briefing at the federal building. She had worked for weeks on the case and wanted to arrive early. She turned on the engine, pulled out of the street slowly, and joined the main road. As she drove through the wide city streets, she noticed people heading to work. Buses passed, cyclists moved in lines, and morning traffic started to build. She hummed softly to herself. She had learned to keep a calm mind before her workdays began. She was confident, but she also knew the world could be unpredictable. When she reached the block where the federal building was located, she slowed down. The building was tall, with glass doors and security cameras around. She parked near the front entrance, got out, and smoothed her blazer. Her hair was neatly tied back. She carried her small leather bag and walked toward the entrance. She didn't notice at first that a patrol car had slowed down behind her. Inside the car, a local police officer sat, watching her. His eyes narrowed, and without asking questions, he turned on the engine and pulled to the curb. Angela heard the sound of the car stopping and turned slightly. The officer stepped out quickly. His boots hit the ground hard. Angela wasn't worried at first. She had always respected police officers. She thought maybe he needed directions or information, but his expression wasn't friendly. His jaw was tight and his hand was already resting on the holster at his side. "Hey, you, stop right there," the officer said sharply. Angela paused, confused. "Good morning, officer," she replied politely. "Is there a problem?" The officer walked closer, not smiling. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. She looked toward the building, then back at him. "I'm on my way to work, sir," she answered calmly. "Work? Here?" he asked with a smirk. "What kind of work are you talking about?" Angela straightened her back. She wasn't a woman who liked confrontation, but she knew how to stay calm. "I work in this building," she explained clearly. "I'm with the federal agency." The officer's eyes narrowed even more. "Show me your ID," he barked. Angela slowly reached for her blazer pocket. She had done this 100 times in her life. Show ID, explain, move on. But this time felt different. The officer's hand shifted closer to his weapon. His voice grew louder. "I said slowly, don't try anything." She stopped and lifted her hand slightly to show she wasn't a threat. "I'm reaching for my badge, sir," she said in a steady voice. But the officer wasn't calming down. A couple of people across the street slowed their steps and began to watch. Angela felt their eyes on her. She pulled out the leather wallet and opened it, showing her official FBI badge. The golden emblem shone in the morning light. "I'm a federal agent," she stated clearly. "My name is Angela James. I work in this building." But instead of stepping back or lowering his hand, the officer let out a short laugh. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of laugh that came when someone didn't take another person seriously. "Yeah, sure you are," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. He gave her a long look, like he was enjoying the power he thought he had. "Nice prop you got there." Angela kept her eyes steady on him. Years of training taught her to stay calm, even when situations felt unfair. "Sir, this is a real badge. I can call my supervisor right now." "If you don't move," he shouted suddenly, cutting her off. His hand went fully to his gun now, fingers resting on the grip. A woman nearby gasped. Another person pulled out a phone to record. Angela froze in place. Her heart beat hard in her chest, but her face stayed calm. She raised both hands slowly to show she had nothing else on her. She was standing in front of her own workplace wearing her work badge, yet being treated like a criminal. Her mind ran through the training she had taken. Stay calm. Don't escalate. Let the situation unfold carefully. She knew there were security cameras above the federal building entrance. Every movement was being recorded. "Sir," she said in a firm but respectful voice, I'm a federal agent. My colleagues are inside. If you give me 1 minute, we can clear this up. But the officer just shook his head, chuckling again. No way, he said. You think I'm that stupid? He took one more step closer, gun still in his hand, though not yet raised. She could see in his eyes that he didn't believe her. Or maybe he didn't want to. Angela's throat felt dry, but she did not let fear take over. She stood tall, her palms open in the air. Her badge was still visible. More people gathered at a distance, whispering, their eyes wide. The morning breeze that had felt soft earlier now felt heavier. She could hear the faint sound of traffic in the distance, but everything else seemed to grow quiet. Just the officer's harsh breathing and her own steady heartbeat filled the space. She could have shouted back or argued, but she chose not to. She knew her calmness would be her strength. Deep down, she also trusted that the building's security would soon notice. After all, this was the main entrance to a federal facility. There were cameras, guards, and agents inside. Someone would see what was happening. Still standing there with a gun pointed at her, being laughed at for simply doing her job, was something no one could truly prepare for. She took another slow breath. Her voice, when it came out, was strong but soft. "Officer," she said, looking him in the eye. "I'm not your enemy. I'm a fellow officer of the law." But the man gave her a cold smile as if he enjoyed her discomfort. The air felt thick. Her hands remained up. People nearby held their breath. Time seemed to move slowly. Angela's heart hurt not because of the gun, but because of the disbelief. She had served her country with loyalty and honor. Yet at that moment, all of that was invisible to him. She didn't know it yet, but inside the building, someone was already watching through the security camera feed, and help was already on the way. But outside, in that moment, she stood alone, calm, steady, and brave in the face of something deeply wrong. This was only the beginning of a day she would never forget. A day that started with quiet skies but was about to shake the silence with truth, justice, and an unexpected turn. The officer's mocking laugh still rang in Angela's ears as she stood near the front steps of the federal building with both hands raised. The morning breeze had turned into a tight knot of air around her, the kind that made every breath feel heavier. People had begun to gather a little farther away, their phones out, some whispering, some wide-eyed. The officer's smirk made the moment feel colder. He was enjoying the control he thought he had. Angela kept her voice steady even as her heart thumped in her chest. She was trained for tense moments, but this one was different. She wasn't facing a stranger on a dangerous mission. She was standing in front of her own workplace, wearing her own badge, and still being treated as a threat. That kind of moment cut deeper than most missions ever could. The officer slowly took his gun out of the holster and pointed it toward her. His movements were controlled, but there was a casualness in his stance, like he didn't think twice about it. His finger rested near the trigger and his eyes didn't waver. "I said, don't move," he barked again. "I'm not moving," Angela answered softly, keeping her hands up. "I work here. This is my badge. You're making a mistake." He tilted his head slightly and let out a small laugh. "Yeah, that's what they all say." From where she stood, she could see the black lenses of the security cameras fixed on the entrance. She had walked through those doors 100 times. She knew the cameras were recording every detail. She silently hoped someone inside was already watching the live feed. She tried again. "I am Special Agent Angela James. You can call the building's front desk right now. They'll verify it in seconds." The officer shook his head. "I don't need to call anyone. I know what I see," he said sharply. Angela didn't respond to his tone. She couldn't afford to raise her voice. Every small movement mattered. Around them, the scene was shifting slowly. A woman standing across the street whispered to a man beside her, pointing toward the officer's drawn gun. A man with a briefcase pulled out his phone. Another stepped back to give more space, uncertain but alert. Inside the building, 2 security officers in the control room were watching the live camera feed. One leaned forward, frowning. "Is that Angela?" he said. The other nodded, already reaching for the intercom. "She's got an officer outside pointing a weapon at her," the first said. "Call the response team. Now." Outside, Angela could hear distant footsteps inside the building, but she kept her focus on the officer. She had to buy time without making it look like she was resisting. "Sir," she said, "you are about to make a very serious mistake. Please lower your weapon. I am not a threat to you or anyone else here." He smiled again, short, smug, and careless. "You think you can scare me with that act? You think that little piece of metal makes you someone important? He motioned toward her badge with the barrel of the gun. Angela didn't flinch. But deep down, a small sting of pain burned in her chest. She had worked hard for that badge. She had trained, sacrificed, and proven herself in ways most people never saw, and in that moment none of it mattered to the man in front of her. She heard a small click behind her. The large glass doors of the federal building opened slowly. She didn't turn her head, but she saw the reflection in the glass panel next to her. 2 federal security officers in dark uniforms had stepped out. One of them raised a hand slightly, signaling to her. But the officer with the gun didn't notice them yet. His focus stayed on her face like he was trying to catch her blinking or flinching. He didn't realize how fast things were changing around him. A man's voice from the steps called out firmly, "Officer." "Lower your weapon." The cop's head snapped toward the sound. His shoulders tensed as he saw 2 security officers and another plainclothes agent approaching. "This is a federal building," one of them said in a steady tone. "You're pointing a gun at a federal agent. Stand down." Angela didn't move. She stayed in her same position. Hands raised, posture straight, voice steady. The officer laughed again, but this time it sounded weaker, like he wasn't sure anymore. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, glancing at her badge again. This is real?" "Yes," she replied simply. For the first time there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he still didn't lower the gun. The federal officers spread out carefully, not rushing him but not giving him control either. The plainclothes agent raised his voice again. "This is your final warning. Put the weapon down." People watching from across the street were recording everything. Car engines slowed as drivers turned to see what was happening. A moment that had started with one man's prejudice was turning into something bigger, louder and harder to hide. Angela's heart felt tight but steady. She reminded herself to breathe evenly. She had faced danger before, real danger, but this felt personal. This wasn't about her as an agent. This was about how she was seen before anyone even knew her name. She spoke again, calm but clear. "Officer, the smartest thing you can do right now is put the gun down and let them verify who I am." His eyes darted between her and the men approaching. His hand trembled slightly now, not from fear of her, but from the sudden shift of power he hadn't expected. He had walked into this moment thinking it was easy to control. He was starting to realize it wasn't. "Backup is coming," one of the federal officers whispered to the other. "Command is on their way." The officer took a half step back, gun still raised but uncertain. Angela could see his jaw tighten. His earlier confidence was starting to crack. "Call it in," the plainclothes agent told him firmly. "You'll find out exactly who she is. But pride is a strong thing." He didn't lower the gun. "She could be faking it," he said. "She's not," the agent replied. "And in 10 seconds, you'll understand just how serious this is." Angela's calmness remained unbroken. Her years in service had taught her that silence can be as powerful as shouting. She stood there with quiet strength, letting the situation expose itself. More security officers poured out from the side entrance. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up from the secure gate. The officer's head turned sharply. He hadn't expected this kind of response. "Sir," the agent said again, his voice lower but firmer. "You are pointing a gun at a federal agent, in front of a federal building, under security cameras, and you're being recorded by at least 10 people. Every second you delay is going to make this worse for you." The officer's hand twitched. Angela didn't move a muscle. She could almost hear her own heartbeat now. A moment stretched long and quiet, and then the sound of another voice broke through, a commanding tone, crisp and firm. "Drop your weapon, now." Angela recognized the voice instantly. It was her unit chief. He had arrived. And with him came authority the officer couldn't ignore. The crowd's murmur grew louder. The cop's eyes darted around. He was no longer the man in charge. Angela stood quietly as the tension in the air thickened. The next few minutes would decide everything, and she knew she wasn't the one who needed to be afraid. The officer was beginning to understand what kind of storm he had started. This was no longer a simple morning. It was turning into a lesson in truth, and that lesson was about to come down hard. The commanding voice from the steps echoed through the open space like a sudden crack of thunder. Everyone froze for a split second. Angela didn't move. Her hands were still raised. The officer's gun was still pointed. And the crowd's quiet whispers grew into a soft, tense buzz. Her unit chief, a tall man with a calm but firm presence, walked down the steps. His face carried no anger, just a look of clear authority. Two senior federal agents flanked him, their jackets slightly open, showing the badges clipped to their belts. They didn't rush, but their steps were steady, deliberate. The officer who had been mocking Angela suddenly realized this was not going to end the way he thought. "Officer," the unit chief repeated slowly, "I said drop your weapon." The officer swallowed hard. For the first time since this started, his eyes flickered with something that looked like nervousness. But his pride still pushed him to keep his posture. His hand stayed near the trigger, but his fingers twitched slightly. She showed a badge," he stammered. "But I couldn't. How do I know it's real?" The unit chief's voice didn't rise. He didn't need to shout. His calm tone was more powerful than yelling. "You are standing in front of a federal building," he said, taking another step closer. "You are pointing a loaded weapon at a federal agent who works in this building. Cameras are rolling. Witnesses are filming. Do you really want to finish that sentence?" Angela stayed quiet. She had learned through years of service that silence sometimes spoke louder than explanations. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. People recording, federal officers standing nearby, her colleagues just inside the building. The officer licked his lips, shifting his stance. The mocking confidence he had earlier was slowly disappearing like smoke. She didn't look like," he started but stopped himself halfway. Every word he didn't finish was louder than the words he spoke. Everyone around understood what he had meant to say. "Doesn't matter what you thought she looked like," the unit chief interrupted sharply. "What matters is the law, and the law does not bend for assumptions." The plainclothes agent who had first confronted the officer stepped forward. "You had every chance to verify her credentials," he said. "Instead, you pointed a weapon and mocked a badge. That's not procedure. That's personal." The crowd across the street had grown larger. Some people leaned forward slightly. Others shook their heads slowly. They were witnessing something unfold in real time. A situation that could have ended very badly if Angela hadn't kept her calm. The officer's arm lowered slightly. Not much, but enough to show that the pressure was getting to him. "Look," he said, his voice lower now. "I was just trying to make sure." Angela finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. "You didn't try to make sure," she said softly. "I told you I was a federal agent. I showed you my badge. You laughed at it. You pointed your gun at me. You didn't call anyone. You didn't verify anything." Her words cut through the heavy air like a clean blade. She wasn't angry. She didn't need to be. Her truth was strong enough on its own. The officer opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His face tightened. He could feel the weight of eyes, cameras, and authority pressing down on him. The gun in his hand suddenly felt heavier than before. "Drop it," the unit chief said one last time, his voice firm and final. The officer's arm shook for a brief moment, and then very slowly he lowered the weapon and placed it on the ground. The sound of the gun touching the pavement was small, but to everyone watching it felt huge. The federal agents moved in quickly. Two of them stepped to the sides of the officer. They didn't rush or shout. They worked with silent, professional precision. Another agent retrieved the weapon and cleared it carefully. The officer stood there stiffly, his breathing faster now. "Wait, what's happening?" he asked nervously. "You'll find out in a few minutes," one agent replied, slipping a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The officer stepped back instinctively. "Hey, I'm a cop." "And she's a federal agent," the plainclothes agent answered calmly. "And you just aimed your gun at her without any proper cause. So yes, you're about to answer for that." The crowd gasped softly as the metallic sound of handcuffs clicked into place. The officer's wrists were locked behind him. The pride he had a few minutes ago was now replaced with a pale face and tight lips. Angela slowly lowered her hands and took a deep breath. Her arms ached slightly from holding them up so long, but she didn't show it. She stood tall, straightening her blazer, the badge still gleaming against her chest. The unit chief came to her side. "You handled this exactly right," he said quietly. She nodded once. She didn't feel triumph. She felt the deep, steady calm of someone who had stood in a storm and not moved. "Ma'am," one of the agents said to the chief, "we've already called the city department. Internal affairs will be here shortly." The crowd continued recording, but some people started to clap softly. Others murmured things like, "Unbelievable," and "She kept her cool the whole time." The officer, now handcuffed, lowered his head slightly. His earlier arrogance had vanished. He realized he was standing on federal property, surrounded by federal officers, and every second of his behavior had been recorded. "Why are you doing this?" he muttered. "I was just trying to do my job." "No," the unit chief replied firmly. "Doing your job means verifying, respecting, protecting people. Not humiliating them. Not laughing at someone's ID because you don't believe what you see." The officer said nothing. He stared down at the pavement as two agents guided him away from the entrance. Angela stood quietly watching. She didn't feel hatred toward him. What she felt was something deeper, a quiet disappointment. She had worn her badge with pride for years, always believing it represented justice, discipline, and respect. Yet here was a moment that showed how fragile those things could feel in front of bias. Inside the building, more agents appeared near the glass doors, watching the scene. Some of them nodded at her with silent respect. They had seen her hold her ground with calm dignity, something not everyone could do under that kind of pressure. The unit chief turned toward her. "I'll handle the official report," he said gently. "You should take a moment to breathe." That was a lot to deal with. Angela exhaled slowly. The breeze touched her face again, and for the first time since the confrontation began, it didn't feel heavy. It felt clear. She walked toward the building entrance slowly, the sound of her heels tapping against the pavement. Behind her, the officer who had mocked her badge just minutes ago was now being led away in handcuffs by the very people he had tried to intimidate. The crowd began to disperse, but the whispers remained. People had witnessed something powerful, not just a clash between an officer and an agent, but a moment when calm, quiet strength overcame arrogance. Angela pushed the glass doors open and stepped inside the building she called her second home. She was greeted by nods and quiet words of support from her colleagues. In the hallway, she leaned slightly against a wall and closed her eyes for a brief second. She didn't let herself fall apart. She didn't let the fear from earlier win. She simply allowed herself a long breath. Outside, sirens wailed softly as an internal affairs car pulled up. The day had started like any other. But now the truth had come to light in front of everyone. Angela straightened her shoulders once more. She knew this incident wasn't just about her. It was a reminder to everyone watching that respect must be earned and given, not assumed or denied. She also knew the story of what happened would spread far beyond the steps of that building. But more than anything, she knew she had stood firm. And that mattered most. The moment the officer was led away in handcuffs, the atmosphere around the federal building shifted. The same crowd that had gathered in tense silence now carried a quiet hum of whispers. People were still holding their phones, still recording, but their faces showed something different now. The fear that had filled the air minutes earlier had turned into something heavier, something that would not be easily forgotten. Angela stood inside the building near the glass doors, her back straight. Her hands still tingled from holding them up for so long earlier, but her face was calm. It wasn't the calm of someone who had won a fight. It was the calm of someone who had survived a storm. The unit chief stepped in behind her. He had already given instructions to the agents outside. More vehicles had arrived. Internal affairs officers from the city department were walking up the steps. This was no longer a simple street stop. It had become a full incident. Angela took a slow breath, her badge still pinned perfectly on her blazer. She could see her reflection in the glass, strong, steady, and composed. She knew many people in her position would have panicked or reacted sharply, but she had chosen calm, and that calm had changed everything. The unit chief came closer and spoke softly. "Angela, the director wants to talk to you upstairs. But first, are you okay?" She turned her head slightly and gave a small nod. "Yes," she said simply. He studied her face for a second, then nodded too. "You handled this better than anyone could have." Angela didn't reply. She just exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the last 30 minutes settle somewhere deep inside her chest. Outside, the officer who had pointed the gun at her was now sitting in the back of a black SUV, still handcuffed. His face, once filled with pride and power, now looked pale. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a blank stare at the ground. Two internal affairs officers stood nearby, talking to federal agents. Everything was being documented. Every second of what happened was caught on security cameras. And now official reports were being prepared. Angela walked down the hallway toward the elevator, the familiar sound of her heels echoing off the clean floor. People passing by gave her respectful nods. Some whispered quiet words of support. Others just looked at her with wide, thoughtful eyes. They had all seen the incident from the monitors or heard it from their colleagues. When she entered the elevator, her reflection stared back at her from the shiny doors. She didn't feel anger. She felt a deep, thoughtful quiet. What had happened wasn't about just one officer and one stop. It was about something bigger, something that many people experienced but few could control the way she had. Upstairs, the director's office was filled with a low buzz. Several senior officials were already there. A large screen on the wall showed a still frame from the security footage, the moment the officer pointed the gun at her badge. Someone paused the image at the exact second his laughter had echoed across the street. Angela stepped in and stood tall. The director, a serious but fair woman with silver hair, looked at her and gave a firm nod. "Angela, take a seat." Angela sat down slowly. She could feel the weight of many eyes on her, but it didn't make her small. It made her feel stronger. The director folded her hands on the table. "I've already seen the footage. You did everything right. You identified yourself. You remained calm. You followed procedure, and you probably saved that man from making an even worse mistake." Angela looked at her hands briefly and nodded. "I just didn't want to make the situation worse," she said softly. "You didn't," the director replied. "You handled it with strength. The way you carried yourself out there, that matters. A lot of people will see this footage. Not just here, but outside this building, too." A senior agent leaned forward. "He laughed at your badge on camera. That alone is a serious matter." Angela didn't flinch. "Yes," she said. "He'll face consequences," the director added calmly. "We've already contacted his department. Internal Affairs has opened an immediate case. They know how serious this is." Angela sat quietly listening to every word. She had been through briefings about other cases before, but this time it was about her. "What you did out there," the director continued, "was not just professional, it was powerful. You kept your composure when most people would have panicked, and that saved lives, yours, his, and maybe someone else's down the line." Angela nodded slowly. She appreciated the words, but she also felt the heaviness behind them. It was not a moment she wanted to celebrate. It was something she wanted people to learn from. Downstairs, the situation was still unfolding. Internal Affairs officers were questioning witnesses, including bystanders who had recorded the incident on their phones. Some of those videos had already begun spreading on social media. A few reporters had arrived near the outer gate, though they weren't allowed inside. The officer who had pointed the gun sat in the SUV, his head low. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. He had thought he had control, thought he could laugh at someone and walk away. He hadn't expected the woman to be a federal agent. He hadn't expected security cameras and witnesses, and he certainly hadn't expected to end up in handcuffs. Back upstairs, the director ended the meeting. "You can take the rest of the day off if you want," she told Angela. "But we'll need your statement later. You're also going to be asked to speak to Internal Affairs." Angela nodded. "I'll be ready." The director gave a small, warm smile. Not the smile of a boss, but of someone who understood. "You've made us proud today." Angela stood up slowly and walked out of the office. Her steps were steady, but inside her chest, there was a quiet mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and something deeper she couldn't fully name. As she passed the open area near the elevators, a few agents clapped softly. She gave them a polite nod and kept walking. She didn't like being the center of attention, but she understood why they were reacting this way. What had happened to her wasn't just personal. It was a moment that would be remembered. Outside, the officer was being taken out of the SUV. Two Internal Affairs investigators guided him toward their unmarked car. He didn't resist. He didn't even speak. The arrogance he once wore like armor had melted away into quiet shame. The federal agents outside moved with calm professionalism. Everything was being done carefully, without any unnecessary noise. This was the kind of situation where actions spoke louder than any speech. A woman who had recorded part of the incident came forward to give her statement. Her hand still trembled slightly. "I've never seen anything like that before," she told one of the investigators. She was so calm. "I think that's why no one got hurt." The investigator nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly why." Angela eventually stepped outside again, not to speak to anyone, but simply to breathe fresh air. The afternoon light had changed. It was brighter now, but the feeling in the air was different from the morning. The tension had been replaced by something clear and firm, just as slowly moving forward. As she stood on the steps, a young security officer walked up to her nervously. "Agent James," he said softly. "I was watching from the control room. I've never seen anyone stay that calm under that kind of pressure. I just wanted to say, thank you." Angela gave him a gentle smile. "Thank you," she replied. She turned her face toward the street. The officer who had mocked her was now gone, taken away in the back of the car. The crowd had thinned, but she knew this was not the end of the story. Internal Affairs would begin a deep investigation. His actions would be documented and shared. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would make some officers think twice before judging someone by what they see. She adjusted her blazer and looked up at the flag waving gently on the pole in front of the building. She had always believed in the law even when it wasn't perfect, and today, she had proven to herself that standing in calm dignity can be louder than shouting. A soft wind touched her face. Her heart finally felt lighter. She didn't need to say anything more. The truth was already speaking for itself. The next few days after the incident were quieter, but the silence carried weight. The story of what happened at the steps of the federal building spread fast, first through phone videos, then through official reports, and eventually through the evening news. For Angela, it didn't feel like a story. It felt like a moment that had cut through her life like a sharp line. One moment she was walking into work as usual. 5 minutes later she was standing in front of a drawn gun, fighting not with force but with calm and truth. On the morning after the incident, Angela walked toward the same building with the same straight posture she had every day. But this time, people looked at her differently. Security officers at the gate gave her small nods of respect. Colleagues whispered softly as she passed. Some gave her encouraging smiles. She wasn't seeking attention, but she could feel it around her like quiet ripples in water. In the lobby, she met the unit chief, who greeted her with a firm handshake. "Internal Affairs worked overnight," he told her. "They've already reviewed the full footage. The case is moving fast." Angela nodded. "I figured it would," she replied quietly. "They're filing charges," he continued. "Pointing a weapon without cause, misconduct, and more." Angela didn't ask for details. She had seen enough cases in her career to know that once something like this started, the law followed its steps carefully. Still, hearing the words out loud gave the moment a new kind of finality. She went up to her office, sat at her desk, and looked at the stack of papers waiting for her. The world around her moved on, but inside, a part of her was still standing on that sidewalk. She remembered the weight of the officer's stare, the laughter at her badge, the sound of his voice when he told her he didn't believe her. It wasn't something a person could easily forget. Later that afternoon, she was called downstairs to meet with investigators from Internal Affairs. They were polite and respectful, but their questions were precise. They asked her to walk them through every second. When she saw the patrol car, when she showed her badge, when he laughed, when he drew his weapon. Angela answered clearly without adding or taking away anything. They thanked her for her cooperation. One of them, an older investigator with a calm face, said quietly, "You did everything right. And more than that, you kept a situation from turning into something far worse." Angela gave a small nod. She didn't say much. Her actions had spoken loudly that day, and they were still echoing. By the third day, the videos of the incident had been shared widely. News channels reported on it. Commentators spoke about what had happened. People online wrote messages, some angry, some grateful, some simply stunned. Angela didn't engage with any of it. She stayed focused on her work. She knew public noise came and went, but the truth stayed steady in official records. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. A group of young trainees, new recruits at the agency, asked if they could meet her. She agreed. They gathered in the small training room, nervous but eager. One of them, a young woman, spoke first. "Ma'am, we watched what happened," she said. "The way you stayed calm, it taught us something. It showed us what real strength looks like." Angela listened quietly. She wasn't used to being called a symbol or an example, but hearing those words from new recruits made her realize that what happened wasn't just an event. It had become a lesson. She stood at the front of the room and spoke softly, almost like she was telling a story. "It's easy to stay calm when things are peaceful," she said. "The real test comes when someone disrespects you, when someone sees you as less than what you are. In those moments, you don't win by shouting louder. You win by standing in your truth. The room was silent, every face watching her closely. Respect isn't something you beg for, she added. It's something you hold within yourself even when others try to take it away. Some of the trainees nodded slowly, their eyes thoughtful. Angela saw herself in a few of them. The same ambition, the same sense of purpose. Meanwhile, the officer who had mocked her badge faced official hearings. The footage was reviewed frame by frame. Witness statements were gathered. His own department issued a public apology to the agency, acknowledging the seriousness of what had happened. The man who had once stood with a gun in his hand now faced losing his badge and his position. Angela didn't watch the hearing. She didn't need to. She trusted the process. She trusted that justice had already started moving the moment he was placed in handcuffs. 1 week later, the director called her into the office again. "The case is settled," the director said. "He's been removed from duty. Formal charges have been filed. It won't be hidden. It will be public record." Angela nodded slowly. It wasn't about revenge for her. It was about accountability. She wanted the truth to be known, not buried. The director leaned forward slightly. "This incident has brought a lot of attention. Some of it is hard. But I want you to know your conduct that day has set a standard. People are learning from it." Angela didn't smile. She simply said, "I hope they do." That evening, as she walked out of the building, the air was cool again, just like the morning it all began. She stood on the same sidewalk looking at the place where everything had happened. The world looked the same, but inside her something had shifted. She had always believed in her work, but now she understood something deeper. Calmness is not weakness. It's strength. And sometimes that strength can change the outcome of everything. A woman passing by stopped her shyly. "Are you the agent from the video?" she asked. Angela gave a small nod. "Thank you," the woman said softly. "You showed what dignity looks like." Angela didn't have a long answer. She just gave a kind smile and said, "Thank you." As the sun set behind the buildings, she walked to her car with quiet steps. She knew this day would be remembered for a long time, not because of loud speeches or big gestures, but because of the power of standing still, standing calm, and standing true. This wasn't the story she had ever expected to be part of, but it was now part of her journey, a story about respect, strength, and justice. A story where the truth had spoken louder than the noise, and as she drove away, the lights of the city glowing softly around her, she knew in her heart, no matter how loud the world can get, calm courage will always have a voice.